That's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, narrated by Disney or Lucasfilm. Whichever way you slice it, legends. So, I have some stuff for you. I do have church in a bit, so I gotta kind of go quick about this, but I finished it, or this section of it, so I need to talk about it, because otherwise I'm gonna go insane. We have Book 4 in Supernatural Encounters, The First Shadow. A lot of stuff here to digest. Let me just mention some things as I went through it. We had lots. There's so much that happens in this section. A lot of it, I'll be honest, went completely over my head. Like, this requires rereading and rereading and rereading. But I want to get these out. I want to get my thoughts out, so I'm going through them once. So I can better on move forward. But there's a bunch of wars going on earlier on in this section. And you had the different factions that had different opinions on how this should all be handled. So you had the Resolute, who were completely set on nonviolence, that wanted no violence. The Judicious, who didn't necessarily want to be violent, but wanted to protect and serve. You had the Renegades, these are all the enemies. And the Renunciants, who were neutral, and they just want to stay out of conflict. Mongol continues to be a threat, not only to, the normal species of the galaxy, but to even the Celestials and the Architects and everything. So Splendid App traps Mongol in a realm, but before Mongol can be completely taken out of the equation, he does manage to leave little splots of himself on different planets, so that way when people eventually colonize those worlds and whatnot, Mongol will spread. So there's that. There's this interesting demigod debate, because the thing is, you have the Supreme Maker who created everything. You have the Celestials, which are basically like angels / mini gods, demigods, like high, powerful, godlike beings, just lesser than the Supreme Maker. Then you have these sort of like demigod things, because you have the Architects, who could also be labeled as angels, I suppose, but they're on a lesser tier than the Celestials. But the beings are on the same tier as these Architects are these demonic seeming, they're not called, I mean, they're demonic like, but it's, these weird shadow entities, which are on the same tier as them in terms of power. But Lonnie has a kind of argument with them, and it's interesting, and it's the first time she realizes that, oh, these things are a threat. Because before, she's like, the only thing she had to worry about was the Celestials, which is why she's trying to rule the galaxy, because if she can unite the galaxy, she thinks she can overtake them, because she doesn't like them. But these other things are just as much a threat, and they're a lot more sadistic and evil than, because Celestials are good. They just, Tilani doesn't agree with them. We also get an indie reference. Yeah, so these typical alien that you think of, like a gray, slender build with pure black eyes, like that typical, flying saucer type alien that you think of. There was a video game of Star Wars that was a lot like Pokemon with sprites and stuff. And that's where those things come from. That's what it's referencing. But these things mess with the Infinity Gates and stuff, and they travel to I guess, the future, because Indiana Jones would technically take place in the future. Now, it's not explicitly stated, but they are trying to mess with things. They get stopped, but they do interact for a brief second before being taken away with an archaeologist, which seems like a direct reference to Crystal Skull. So, in a weird sense, you could say that Indiana Jones is loosely canonized in Star Wars. There's this whole section with Lorna and this being called Starcrow. And I thought this whole section was phenomenal. Like, the utter uncomfortableness I felt for this poor girl who got married to this man. She was very happy. But it was all a ploy, because she was meant to get pregnant and birth this dark thing. And it was just very uncomfortable to read about. In the same way, though, it kind of gave me vibes to Bothor and Luthien, or whatever it's called, in the Silmarillion, where it's like just a story hidden amongst, this whole, like, Bible. I mean, the whole Bible's like a story, right? But, like, you have this sort of, like, structure, but then you get, like, this normal, like, kind of narrative for a second. And so that's what that was a lot like. There is a being, like a Eldritch one, called Yamaka, which, through the years and down the line, would be misinterpreted as Yan Yamaka, what the Yusong Vong believe in, which I thought was interesting. We also get some interesting origins and stuff for the Gungans and Rakata, and that they're, I think, slightly related. We get the origins of Melody, which were from the Essential Atlas and Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia. It touches on the Osin Stone, which was used by Mother Talzin, Sidious, Lumaya, and Black Hole. We also get stuff with the Inchurian Yith, which was interesting, which would later become the Avatha. Sorry, no, that's a different thing. But the Yith and the Inchuri were fighting and stuff. I'm spouting off a lot of random things. This whole section really just shows a lot of birth and growth and decay. Civilizations rise up, normal people, wars, death, sorrow. But amidst of that, you have the mundane, right? You have the normal people, whether that be aliens or humans, fighting. And then you get, behind the scenes of all that, the spiritual, the cosmic, internal affairs going on behind the scenes. Like, imagine if right now I'm talking about this book, and in the heavens, in the unknown realms that we can't perceive, there's wars being waged. There's discussions being had on what to do with the world, like in Congress, but for spiritual matters. Like, that's what's going on in this period of time in the Star Wars universe. There's conflicts and battles being waged amongst the mortals, and there's conflicts and battles being waged amongst the higher-ups. So there's a lot of that going on in this section. We get Zethotep that's doing a lot of stuff, which is very similar personality and motivation to Nyarlathotep from H.P. Lovecraft. So, I think people are being funny when they're like, oh, we can connect H.P. Lovecraft to Star Wars. Joe Bongiorno is clearly inspired by a lot of H.P. Lovecraft works and is reincorporating a lot of designs and attributes and characteristics of Eldritch gods from H.P. Lovecraft, but it's very clearly being recontextualized for Star Wars. So it's not like you can read... I guess you can headcanon it if you really want to, but this, unlike other things that people try to criticize for, I don't think that Joe Bongiorno, and he could be, I could be misinterpreting it, but it doesn't seem like, in this instance, that these Eldritch gods are meant to be the literal Eldritch gods from H.P. Lovecraft stories. I think it's meant to be more just reincorporating those, like, ideas and how some of these things look into the Star Wars universe, and that's it. It's like, Cthulhu is not a thing in Star Wars, but there are beings like Typho Gem that look like Cthulhu and have the same sort of stature and design to Cthulhu. So, like in Star Wars, Typho Gem it's Cthulhu, right? and Xenothep is our Star Wars version of Nyarlathotep. So similar ideas, similar themes, but not meant to be the same being. Just to make that clear, unless Joe later says no, actually you're wrong. It actually is that, but I don't think that's what he's going for. One consistent thing that's being shown throughout all of this, because this is a large section of the story. Like, this goes on from page 340 all the way to page 416. So this is a large section of the book, or of the whole book of Supernatural Encounters. I mean, one consistent motif is that mankind is consistently the worst. We later, near the end of this, dive into more of that, but is it purely man's nature? Or is there something behind the surface going on with all that? But consistently, throughout this whole section, mankind tends to be the worst. They tend to be consistently causing wars, causing conflicts, causing problems. It always doubles down, and this origin of a lot of, not all of it, but a lot of the conflicts that wage are in large part due to humanity. Why is that? I know why, but we'll get into that. I just remember that as a motif as you get through this book, book 4 in here. The Aang-Ti, one of the ancient elder races, interesting as they are, make the Cathal Rift to kind of separate themselves from other people, and that they can't stop like Celestials and beings of those caliber coming into the Cathal Rift, but it's meant to block a lot of the normal beings from getting in. And again, as I read this, I'm not going to get into the canon discussion, but the possibilities are endless with the stuff that is being introduced here, and really gives me a new perspective on how I can go about, because those who know me long enough, I've talked about my passion project being Jacen Solo, my favorite character in Star Wars, and the possibility of how to better incorporate and recontextualize a lot of darkness and Legacy of the Force by means of that 5-year sojourn. What happened? But one of the beings that Jacen learned from during his time away from everyone was from the Aang-Ti monks, one of the oldest races that we now know in the Star Wars universe because of this book. The things that the Aang-Ti know, right? There's so much things spiritually now that just like in H.P. Lovecraft, where people go insane, not that Jacen goes insane, but what if beyond the things that we were told that Jacen learned, he learned things of the ancient past that no mortal mind can actually contain? So he forgets, but the scars are left in his brain, right? If I do this right, if I can figure this out and make this work, this could be a great, not only contextualizing the universe and the mythos that we're learning here, but further understanding Jacen as a character as he's portrayed in Dark Nest. Because he isn't a bad guy, but he's clearly different. And, if you just... We don't know enough, right? We don't have the context. We just know he was gone for a few years. 5 years according to Dark Nest, 6 years according to Leland Shee, since Unifying Force. And by the time of Dark Nest, he's returned home and he's different. And he just learned a bunch of techniques. That's, as far as we know, he had a couple visions and he learned a couple techniques. But something happened beyond that. I think if I can make this work, this is so fascinating now. The possibilities here are endless, where depending on what Jacen's learned, even if he doesn't remember it completely, to help transition this could be phenomenal. I'm excited. The book has made me even more passionate about this subject and the possibilities that I could, to the ancient past of Star Wars, tying into Jacen's arc. Beautiful. But yeah, it just got me all excited about that because of the Aang-Ti monks thing. But we also get an interesting section that gives us the origin of the Guardian on Yavin, because when Exar Kun, years down the line, millennia later, would come to Yavin, there was a monster that he, corrupted and turned into, this Masasi thing. And later on down the line, during the newspaper strips, Luke Skywalker would confront it as well. So we get the origins of that being here. there's also this idea that there's all this evil in the world, all this destruction, all this death, all this loss going on in the universe, and, you know, a lot of people think, well, angels, the celestials, are evil for not interfering. A lot of the ways that people go, well, God in our world can't exist because look at all the pain and suffering in the world, and God just allows it to happen, right? Therefore, God is evil or God does not exist, right? But the way you get around that is is there one possible reason that God might allow something to happen? And humans can think of like 10,000 reasons why things happen and why it's allowed to happen. So all you need is one reason to dissuade the argument, because the argument hinges on the fact that there's no reason, that there's no justifiable reason to allow that to happen. But how can you possibly know that as a limited being with your, 80, maybe 100 years on this earth, and you expect to know everything and know, right? Like, if you have an infinite mind, infinite knowledge, maybe you have a perfectly good justifiable reason to do those things, right? Or to allow those things to happen. So, same thing with the Celestials and stuff, right? Like, they know that there's a divine plan. They're not interfering for their reasons, right? The burden of proof is on the people complaining about it to say, oh, well, why aren't they? Well, they probably have a good reason, right? But so it's an interesting thing brought up in here. Now, here's one of the most fascinating sections. The dark beings, these eldritch entities, confront Titlani again, and they ask her, please join us, or be destroyed. Now, they're on the same tier level of power in this universe, so Titlani can't destroy them, but she can banish them from her realm. But now she knows that she's some sort of threat to them, because they try to make her join her cause. But she doesn't know what she's a threat to. But what she does figure out is that she thinks about history, and throughout it is that the Dark Ones consistently and mainly seem to invest all their time and energy into humanity. It's not that humans are inherently evil, necessarily. It's that all the dark forces want them to fail, want them to do these things, encourage them to do these things, prey upon their fears, their greed, their pride, to get them to do these things. But there's also a lot of positive aspects of humanity. So it's just a really fascinating thing to think about in the Star Wars universe. Humanity is the cause of a lot of it. Look at the Empire. It's human-centric. The Old Republic. The Separatists, you could say, from a certain point of view, were the good guys, and they were just a bunch of aliens. So there's a lot of this, that's very fascinating and interesting. That recontextualizes a lot of things. I mean, the Sith themselves, their whole religion is like a religion based off of satanic things. Right? Like, for all we know, during the movies, during the Old Republic, during Dawn of the Jedi, during everything, beyond Palpatine, beyond Krayt, beyond everything, there were cosmic spiritual forces behind it. Like, think about the stuff that Palpatine did. I bet you he talked to one of them without even realizing it. So, a lot of interesting things there. But, not done yet. I have more, and then I gotta go. This was fun. So, we learned about some demonic things, like the life extension methods. Itsu Ashmud, which in basic means essence transfer, and Wakrum, which in basic means consume essence, which is a mass sacrifice, which is something that Vitiate / Valkorion / Tenebras used when he destroyed, he would do these ancient Sith satanic rituals on a planet, which would basically nuke the entire planet of life, except for Vitiate, and he would go on living. It's also something that Darth Nihilus does, but the difference is that Nihilus isn't goal isn't to live forever or to destroy the Jedi as a primary goal anyway. His goal is just, I have a burning need to eat and consume. And that's all he does. And now, the destroying Jedi might help with that, but that's not his primary goal, because he's so consumed by the hunger. But Vitiate is a lot more in control of that. But I thought that was interesting. It's actually an ancient demonic, or Eldritch One, ritual. Also, there's kind of, as Titlani thinks a bit more about this, there's a diss on Grey Jedi, which is, as it talks about the light and dark, it talks about the dark being a perversion of light. That you get this thing in Hindu, Buddhist ideas where even the Avatar: The Last Airbender show, where you have yin and yang, light and dark, and they complement each other and they need each other. But it's a false understanding of the universe and how the world works. Because darkness, in its actual definition, is absence of light. It is not the shadow that follows the light around. That's a separate thing. That's a natural form of darkness. That's not what the dark side is. It is a perversion. It is like sin in Christian theology. It is a perversion of that which is good, which is what George Lucas has also reiterated. The dark side does not need to exist. It does not complement the light. It is not something necessary to balance out the light. A lot of fans have made this sentiment too before. They go, Grey Jedi, Grey Jedi, Grey Jedi. In a sense, there's Grey Jedi Qui-Gon didn't always obey the Jedi Council, but he's still irrecoverably and most definitely a light side user, right? The whole Grey Jedi notion is simply silly, and this kind of further hammers that point in, because again, the dark side is not some balance to the light. It is a perversion of that which is good, which is the light side, which is the right, and the dark side is perverting that which is good. So, which is what this book further reiterates. So that's good. And the Mortis Dagger gets created. And we get this big war between Talatni's growing army that she's tried to build for all this time, but the thing is, she wanted to use this against the Celestials, but she ended up using it against the shadowy beings, and they lost. They're not gone, but they lost. They ran away for a bit. And one of their soldiers, I guess, had, a little bit beforehand, with his own blood, created the Mortis Dagger. A dagger which could kill even the Celestial. And, Titlani doesn't kill him, but she sends him away. And Titlani realizes in this moment, as she fights this war and stuff and banishes these dark beings, that her goal, her conquest to rule the galaxy, to be right, to be the goddess, was wrong. And she realizes her error, and she regrets her decisions. And that's what we're kind of left with. Again, at this point in time, we're 4 books in, 400 pages in, we still have not even gotten to the Mortis arc of TCW with the father, the son and daughter, and Fate of the Jedi's Abeloth. We haven't even reached that yet, but there's so much interesting things here. Again, there's that middle section where a lot of stuff kind of went over my head, I'm not going to lie, but still, this has been a fantastic read, and it's a book that garners rereads upon rereads upon rereads. Especially if you haven't read a lot of the Expanded Universe. The more you read and then go back to this, the more you understand and the more you'll appreciate, right? But even me, who's read a good portion of it, I still don't understand everything. There's still a lot of it that kind of just went requires rereading. But, I'll do that on my own time. But this is my first time through. Book 4, a lot of fun, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting concepts and philosophical and theological things to think about within the Star Wars universe. And I gotta get heading to church, but I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And remember, may the Force be with you. Till next time.